In 2002, legendary hot rod builder Boyd Coddington died with a secret locked inside his garage. For years, nobody knew what he was really working on. Then, decades later, someone finally opened those doors and found something that shocked the entire hot rod world. What they discovered wasn't just a car. It was proof that Boyd had been chasing an impossible dream the entire time, and nobody saw it coming. Boyd Coddington wasn't just a car builder. He was a revolutionary. From the 1960s until his death in 2002, he transformed hot rodding from a backyard hobby into high art. His cars didn't just turn heads, they rewrote the rules of what was possible. Every vehicle that left his shop was a masterpiece. Magazine covers, award ceremonies, collectors fighting over his work. Boyd had done it all. But here's what most people didn't realize. The cars everyone saw and celebrated were only half the story. Boyd was obsessed with perfection in a way that bordered on madness. He would spend 6 months on a single panel if he thought it wasn't perfect. He'd scrap an entire engine bay and start over because the geometry was off by fractions of an inch. His team at Boyd Coddington Hot Rods in Southern California worked long hours under impossible standards. Some people called him a genius. Others called him impossible to work with. Both were true. What made Boyd different from every other builder of his era was this: he didn't just want to build cars. He wanted to build the car. The one that proved everything he believed about design, engineering, and vision. The one that would cement his legacy forever. Throughout the 1990s, people close to Boyd noticed something changing. He became quieter, more secretive. He'd disappear into his garage for hours, sometimes days. When asked what he was working on, he'd smile and change the subject. His closest friends knew better than to push. Boyd kept his secrets. Then, in 2002, Boyd Coddington passed away at age 63. The hot rod world mourned. Tributes poured in. Magazine articles celebrated his incredible body of work. Television specials ran through his greatest hits. Everyone thought they knew his full story. They were wrong. What nobody knew was that Boyd had left something unfinished. Something hidden. Something that would take years for anyone to even find, let alone understand what it meant. In the years after Boyd's death, his garage sat mostly untouched. It was a shrine to his genius, filled with tools, blueprints, half-finished metal work, and the ghosts of 1,000 ideas. His family and the people who ran his shop knew that somewhere in that space, there was an unfinished car. But nobody had really looked closely at what it was. Then, around 2010, nearly a decade after Boyd died, someone decided it was time to open those doors and see what the master had been working on in his final years. What they found stopped them cold. Hidden in the back corner of the garage, covered in a tarp and surrounded by stacks of notes, sketches, and measurements, was a car unlike anything Boyd had ever built before. It wasn't like his famous creations that everyone knew about. This was different, raw, more personal, more obsessive. Every surface showed the fingerprints of someone who had been wrestling with a vision that wouldn't let him go. The car was incomplete. Doors hung open. The interior was gutted. Parts of the chassis were still being worked on. But even in its unfinished state, it was breathtaking. The proportions were perfect. The lines flowed like water. Everything about it screamed Boyd's genius, but with something else underneath. Something desperate. As people began to examine the car more carefully, they realized Boyd hadn't just been building it. He had been studying it. The garage was filled with photographs of the car at different stages. Written notes covered nearly every available surface. Some notes were measurements. Others were philosophical musings about design and perfection. A few looked almost like confessions. Boyd's team members started talking. Some remembered conversations from years before Boyd died. He had mentioned this project in passing. He talked about it like it was the thing he needed to complete before he could rest. Like his entire life's work had been leading to this moment. Like this one car held answers to questions he'd been asking his whole life. But why had he kept it so secret? Why hide it from the world? Why not let anyone help finish it? The answer was about to reveal itself. When Boyd's team finally got a full look at the car, they brought in photographers and documentarians to record every detail. What emerged was a story written in metal and paint, a story only Boyd understood, and one he'd apparently never planned to share. The car was a roadster, not a typical hot rod, but something more experimental. Boyd had been pushing boundaries his entire career, but this machine felt different. It was smaller than his usual builds, more intimate. The proportions suggested Boyd was trying to prove something very specific about automotive design, something that conventional wisdom said was impossible. Inside the garage, scattered among the tools and blueprints, were stacks of reference materials. Boyd had been studying the history of car design obsessively. Not just hot rods, but everything: Italian sports cars from the 1950s, European race cars, even vintage aircraft design. He had marked pages with notes in his handwriting, arrows pointing to specific details, questions written in the margins. Why does this work? Can I do better? What if I tried this? One detail stood out immediately. Boyd had been working on the car's proportions using mathematical principles. There were sketches showing ratios and measurements that went beyond aesthetics. He was searching for something almost scientific, a perfect balance between form and function that most builders never even considered. The car's body panels showed evidence of being remade multiple times. Paint layers suggested Boyd had stripped sections down and started over again and again. Some panels had been worked on so many times that the metal was paper-thin in places. It was the work of someone who couldn't let go, someone chasing a vision that kept slipping just out of reach. But the most telling evidence was in Boyd's personal notes. Scattered through the garage were journals, some just loose pages, others in bound notebooks. In these writings, Boyd had documented his thoughts about the project. Some entries were technical, others were deeply personal. One phrase appeared repeatedly: "the last car I'll ever build." He knew, apparently, that this would be his final creation, and he was determined to make it mean something. The big question remained unanswered. What was he actually trying to prove? What was so important about this particular car that it consumed the final years of his life? And why did he never show it to anyone? The answer lay in understanding Boyd's past, and what had driven him to become the legend he was. To understand the mysterious roadster, you had to understand Boyd's journey. And it started in a place most people didn't expect, with a man who wanted to prove something to himself. Boyd Coddington grew up around cars. His father was involved in racing and hot rodding in California during the golden age of the sport. But Boyd's relationship with cars wasn't just about engines and speed. It was about design, about beauty, about taking something mechanical and transforming it into art. In the 1960s and 1970s, when Boyd was building his reputation, hot rodding was seen as crude, dangerous, a working-class rebellion against refinement. But Boyd had a different vision. He believed hot rods could be sophisticated, that they could be as carefully designed and engineered as any high-end sports car, that you didn't have to choose between power and elegance. His early work proved it. Cars like the Silhouette and the Alamo showed the world something new. These weren't your grandfather's hot rods. They were refined, elegant. They had presence. They had meaning. But as Boyd's fame grew, something shifted inside him. He became obsessed not just with building great cars, but with understanding why certain designs worked. Why did a specific curve make people feel something when they looked at it? What was the relationship between proportion and beauty? Could you measure perfection? In the 1990s, Boyd started talking differently in interviews. He spoke less about the cars he'd already built and more about the car he still needed to build. The one that would answer all the questions he'd been asking. The one that would prove his entire philosophy was correct. This wasn't arrogance, exactly. It was something deeper, a genuine belief that he hadn't yet created his masterpiece. That everything before had been preparation. That one final car held the key to everything. That car was the roadster waiting in his garage. According to people who worked with him during this period, Boyd became increasingly withdrawn. He'd turn down lucrative commissions. He'd decline interviews. He'd disappear into his workshop for weeks at a time. His team knew he was working on something, but he refused to discuss it with anyone. Not even his closest collaborators. One mechanic who worked for Boyd during the late 1990s later recalled a conversation that stuck with him. Boyd had said something like, "When I'm done with this car, people will understand what I was trying to do the whole time. They'll look back at everything else and see it differently." But Boyd ran out of time, and the car remained unfinished, which raised an even darker question. Had Boyd intentionally kept it hidden because he knew he was running out of time? Was the secrecy a conscious choice, or was it something else entirely? The answer wasn't simple, but the more people studied Boyd's notes and talked to his inner circle, a complex picture emerged. Boyd Coddington was a perfectionist in the most literal sense. He couldn't release work he didn't believe was finished. And this car, this final roadster, represented something he couldn't let go of. It wasn't ready. It might never be ready. And that drove him insane. One of Boyd's longtime employees gave an interview years later that shed light on this struggle. He described Boyd in his final years as a man caught between two impossible desires: the desire to show the world what he'd created, and the certainty that it still wasn't good enough. Boyd couldn't finish it because finishing it meant accepting it was complete, the employee said. And Boyd didn't believe anything was ever complete. But there was something else, too. Something darker. In his later years, Boyd had become aware that his health was declining. He'd had various medical issues that made him realize his time was limited. And as mortality became real, his behavior around the secret car changed. He stopped bringing people into the garage. He stopped talking about it openly. He seemed to retreat into privacy with the project. Some people close to Boyd believed he was protecting himself from judgment. Throughout his career, Boyd had been both celebrated and criticized. There were people in the hot rod world who thought he was a genius. There were others who thought he was pretentious, that he was trying to turn hot rodding into something it wasn't meant to be, that he was too intellectual, too obsessive, too demanding. The secret car, perhaps, was Boyd's most vulnerable creation. It represented everything he truly believed about design and beauty. If he showed it to the world and people didn't understand it, or worse, if they rejected it, it would shatter him. So instead, he kept it hidden. He worked on it alone. He refined it endlessly, and he never had to face the possibility of failure. There was also a practical reason for the secrecy. By the 1990s, Boyd's reputation was so legendary that anything he touched was immediately valuable. Cars flew out of his shop and into private collections at astronomical prices. If Boyd had announced a final masterpiece, every collector in the world would have wanted it. The pressure would have been immense. The expectations would have been crushing. By keeping it secret, Boyd kept it pure. He kept it for himself. It was the one thing he didn't have to share with the world until it was absolutely perfect. Until it met his impossible standards. But fate had other plans. Boyd would never finish it, and the garage would stay locked until someone finally had the courage to open it and see what the master had really been chasing. When researchers and documentarians finally cataloged everything in Boyd's garage, they discovered something extraordinary. Boyd had left messages. Not intentionally, perhaps, but messages nonetheless. Hidden in sketches, written in margins, encoded in the very structure of the unfinished car. The notebooks told a story of a man wrestling with doubt and vision simultaneously. One entry read, "Everyone thinks they know what I do. They think it's about chrome and engines. They have no idea." Another, "This car will show them. This car has to show them." What did show them mean? What was Boyd trying to prove? As people studied the car itself, patterns emerged. Every design choice seemed deliberate, intentional. The proportions of the body, the placement of every curve, the relationship between the wheels and the fenders, it all pointed toward a specific philosophy. Boyd appeared to be testing a theory about human perception and automotive beauty. He seemed to believe that certain proportions triggered emotional responses in viewers almost unconsciously. That beauty wasn't subjective, it was mathematical. The research materials in the garage supported this. Boyd had collected photographs and measurements of cars throughout history that he considered beautiful. He'd analyzed them, broken them down into ratios and percentages. He was searching for a universal language of design, something that transcended taste or fashion. One sketch in particular stood out. It showed the Roadster's side profile with intricate measurements and annotations. But overlaid on top of the car were sketches of other famous designs. A famous Italian sports car from the 1950s, architectural elements from classical buildings, even natural forms like the spiral of a seashell. Boyd was drawing connections. He was showing himself, and whoever might eventually see this, that the same principles of beauty appeared everywhere in nature and design. It was like Boyd was having a conversation with the car, like he was using the unfinished Roadster as a tool to answer questions that had haunted him his entire life. There were also personal touches that suggested this car meant something beyond design theory. Small details that only Boyd would notice or understand. A specific curve that matched the lines of his favorite car from childhood. Proportions based on measurements that held personal significance. This wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was deeply emotional. One of the most poignant discoveries was a series of photographs Boyd had taken of the car at different stages. In some of the earliest photos, you could see Boyd's reflection in the car's polished surfaces. A man studying his own creation, examining it like it held answers. In the later photos, taken just before his death, Boyd looked thinner, tired, but still studying, still searching. The final photograph in the sequence was different. It wasn't of the car at all. It was of the garage itself, the walls covered with sketches and notes, tools organized with obsessive precision, and in the center, the incomplete Roadster under a shaft of light from the window. On the back of that photograph, in Boyd's handwriting, "Everything I know, everything I am." After Boyd's death, his team faced a choice. They could finish the car themselves, making assumptions about what Boyd would have wanted. Or they could preserve it exactly as he left it. Incomplete, mysterious, perfect in its imperfection. They chose preservation, but they also chose to tell the story. In interviews conducted years later, Boyd's closest collaborators revealed details that deepened the mystery and answered some questions while raising new ones. One master craftsman who had worked with Boyd for over 2 decades spoke about the final years with unusual honesty. Boyd was afraid, the craftsman said, not of failure exactly, but of completion. He believed that once something was finished, it was dead. The moment you put the last bolt in place, you stop improving it. You stop dreaming about it. He couldn't accept that. So this car became his way of staying alive by never finishing it. Another team member recalled Boyd saying something that stuck with him. "When I'm gone, people will open this garage and they'll finally understand. They'll see that I wasn't trying to build a car. I was trying to answer a question that's been asked since the beginning of time. What is beauty, and can you make it?" But there was a practical revelation too. As the team examined the car more closely, they realized it was actually much further along than anyone initially thought. Boyd had hidden his progress. Large sections were nearly complete. The engine compartment was finished. The chassis was sound. The interior, though gutted, had carefully planned designs sketched out. Boyd hadn't been struggling with the car. He had been hiding its completion. This was the shocking realization. Boyd could have finished this car. He had the skill. He had the time, at least in the early stages of the project. He had the resources, but he chose not to. He chose to work on it in secret. He chose to keep it incomplete. He chose to let it consume him. One of Boyd's business partners offered a theory that seemed to resonate with everyone who heard it. "I think Boyd realized that this car was more important as an idea than as a finished product. As long as it was unfinished, it was perfect. It was everything he imagined. The moment someone drove it off the lot, reality would replace the dream. And Boyd couldn't live with that." The team also discovered something else in Boyd's papers, sketches for a second car, and notes suggesting there might have been a third. It seemed Boyd's vision extended beyond this single Roadster. He was planning a series of vehicles, each exploring different aspects of design philosophy. Each meant to answer different questions. But he never got to build them, and he never explained why this first car had to remain secret. What emerged was a portrait of a man so committed to his vision that he was willing to sacrifice completion, recognition, and legacy itself, just to protect the purity of the idea. When Boyd Coddington's secret car was finally revealed to the public through documentaries and magazine features, the hot rod world didn't know what to make of it. Some people were disappointed. They wanted to see a finished masterpiece, not an incomplete work. They wanted answers, not more questions. But others understood immediately what Boyd had done. They saw the unfinished roadster not as a failure, but as a final statement. A masterpiece precisely because it was incomplete. A perfect representation of the endless pursuit of perfection itself. The car has never been finished. It sits in a climate-controlled facility now, preserved exactly as Boyd left it. Thousands of people have seen it. Designers, architects, artists, and dreamers have studied it. And every single person who sees it understands something different. That was Boyd's real genius. He created a car that means something unique to everyone who encounters it. In the years since the garage was opened, Boyd's philosophy has influenced a new generation of builders and artists. His approach to design, the mathematical analysis of beauty, the obsessive refinement, the willingness to reject convention, has become a framework for thinking about creation itself. Not just in hot rodding, but in architecture, industrial design, and fine art. Schools now teach Boyd Coddington's methods. His sketches and notes are studied by design students around the world. The unfinished roadster has become more famous and more influential than any completed car he ever built. But perhaps the deepest legacy is something more personal. Boyd's secret car taught us something about human nature. About the difference between the thing we make and the dream that drives us to make it. About how sometimes the pursuit matters more than the destination. About how perfectionism, taken to its extreme, isn't about ego or arrogance. It's about love. Boyd Coddington loved cars. But more than that, he loved the process of creation itself. He loved the struggle, the refinement, the endless questioning. The secret roadster was his love letter to that struggle. It was his way of saying, this is what matters. Not the finished product, the journey, the vision, the relentless pursuit of something you can never fully grasp but can never stop reaching for. When Boyd died, people thought they knew his story. The legendary builder, the genius, the innovator, the man who changed hot rodding forever. But the real story was hidden in a garage, waiting to be discovered. And when it finally was, it revealed something deeper than any trophy or magazine cover ever could. It revealed the truth, that Boyd Coddington wasn't trying to build a perfect car. He was trying to build the question itself into metal and paint. He was asking us all through every curve, every measurement, every obsessive note scrawled in the margin, what does it mean to create? What does it mean to dream? And how do we live with the gap between the two? That's the secret Boyd Coddington took to his grave. And that's the secret his unfinished car continues to whisper to everyone who stands before it. What do you think Boyd was really searching for? Was the incomplete car his greatest achievement or his greatest failure? What would you have done if you were in his position? Leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And if you want to learn more about the builders and dreamers who changed automotive culture, hit subscribe, because there are more incredible stories waiting.